hello. Welcome to Be My Guest with me, Rory Smith. The stereotypical image of an addict that society held is thankfully beginning to change. No longer is an addict just seen as someone who doesn't own a home, doesn't work, or even a drunk at work. An addict could be someone who was brought up in a wealthy family, privately educated, and still showed up for work in a suit. Just like Ben. Despite appearing to have it all, he was secretly battling a chemsex addiction. For those of you who don't know what that is, this episode will teach you. For Ben, it started as just fun on the London gay scene, where he was even a promoter in some of the biggest gay clubs in the city. But it ended in inpatient rehab. And towards the end of this episode, we'll learn how Ben had to strip away everything he ever knew about himself to become the person he was always meant to be. You grew up in Essex, and you said that your life spontaneously combusted when you were 15 years old. Why was that?
So, in a nutshell, I had an idyllic childhood, and I would say it was idyllic looking back on it. Lovely family home, family life, privately educated. So on the outside, it looked great. And as a young kid, a young child growing up, it was great. But my parents acrimoniously got divorced when I was 15, and that's when I say my life spontaneously combusted. I thought everything was fine and everything was going well. And it was all great until it wasn't. And that's what I often refer to, that as spontaneous combustion. That's what I refer to it as.
What effect did the divorce have?
From a young person growing up and their life being as perfect as they thought it could possibly be, my life turned 180. I wasn't able to articulate my feelings and my thoughts and my emotions at that point, which is at that point I started using substances. I developed an eating disorder at the age of 15, 16 years old. All of the feelings were very internal because I wasn't able to vocalise them.
You were saying there that this is when the eating disorder started as well. How did that come around for you?
So it was all a very long time ago, but it was the first thing I could control. So everything outside of my kind of remit, I wasn't able to control very much. So I wasn't able to control anything really that was going on externally for me. But I was able to control my eating, so that's something that I did at 15 years old. And at that age, it was very difficult because there weren't many guys of that age that had an eating disorder. There weren't many boys that had an eating disorder or discussed it, actually. There was a chap on Coronation Street called Adam Rickett years ago. He had an eating disorder, and I remember when I was growing up, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, guys do have these. They do get eating disorders. And that was something that I was able to control. And I remember I got very, very slim very, very quickly, weighing myself up 4 or 5 times a day, running to the gym, doing a workout and running home and eating like an apple a day. That's what I remember. That's what I remember that time in my life being like. It was actually a really tricky time actually for someone of my age. Couldn't really articulate my feelings and my emotions, didn't have control over anything. I really wanted to go to university. At the age of 16, 17, my whole academic trajectory at that time completely changed. But that was something that was the first kind of element of self-harm, I would say, was an eating disorder. Then substance use started very quickly afterwards, which I also identify as, as some element of self-harm too.
What were the substances and how old were you?
I was about 15, 16 years old, and I just remember rummaging around for mum's cigarettes to start with, because I was like, let's try that first. And then mum used to take lots of pills and medication. I was like, oh, what's that? Let's take that. Whatever mum's got, I'll take one. So it was definitely benzodiazepines, Valiums, as street name as people would know them as now. And then quite quickly, 17, 18 years old, was speed. Was the first substance that I touched at that age. But 15 years old, 15, 16, I started taking prescription medication. They weren't prescribed to me, but they were prescription medication. And then moving on to speed, and then cocaine and things in my late teens.
So you were also dealing with your sexuality at that stage, weren't you?
At that stage, I was ignoring it, and I say ignoring it because I At the age of 8, I remember saying to my mum, I think I'm gay.
Mm-hmm.
And she just looked at me and said, I don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, okay, I don't know what you're talking about. That's fine. And then again, about 11 or 12, I said to my mum, I really think I'm gay.
Mm-hmm.
And she had some story for me saying I couldn't possibly be gay or whatever it was. And I just agreed with mum. And because I suffered quite a lot of trauma in my teenage years, from 15 years old, there was some more things that happened quite quickly after my parents got divorced.
Mm-hmm.
My sexuality was pushed to one side, and I had girlfriends up until I was 20, 21, 22, and I enjoyed my time with them. I wasn't forcing myself to do anything that I didn't want to do at the time. I don't ever remember thinking, oh, I have to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose in a time where we are now, where sexuality is so fluid, as is gender, then it was not as fluid at all. You're talking, I'm 44 this year. So at the age of 17, 18, all those years ago, it wasn't such a thing, gender fluidity and sexuality. Sexually fluid.
Did you have representatives in the media on TV that you could look at who were gay? Because when you were 12 years old, that's a word that wasn't used commonly in the media at that time.
No, growing up, Section 28 was in place. Instigated by the Tories at the time, that you weren't allowed to be taught about same-sex relationships in schools, very much so. So there wasn't really many people to look at, and anyone that was outwardly gay in the press was extremely camp.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just a very much gender expression, sexuality, expression of sexuality. It was all very, very out there, and that wasn't how I identified.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't how I came across. I was like, oh God, there's no one like me anywhere really. But I very much, in terms of the icons, Boy George was just very much up there for me, and all gender non-conforming, androgynous, as we would call it today, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Pop stars, David Bowie, Grace Jones, lots of people that kind of pushed the parameters when it came to gender non-conformity, as well as sexuality, not really conforming to any form of sexuality.
So when did you move to London?
So I grew up in Essex, and it was Zone 4, so it wasn't really too far away.
Mm-hmm.
And then I moved to South London in my early 20s. So I came out in my early 20s, mm-hmm. and I was living kind of a double life for a little bit.
So you came out in London, but not in Essex?
I came out in Essex.
To your family?
To my mum. My parents got divorced, as we know.
Mm-hmm.
I said to my mum in my early 20s, I met a friend on a gay chat line, and this was way before Grindr and
mm-hmm.
Gaydar and all of these things. It was called the Gay Exchange,
mm-hmm.
and you had to call this number if you were looking for a good time. Literally that. I remember the advert, and it was a picture of a video of a guy putting his arms crossed, calling, if you're looking for a good time, call the Gay Exchange. I think I said it on my Attitude interview,
mm-hmm.
and I did. I called it, and I contacted a guy who was living in North London, and I was living in Essex, and we had 2 different pseudonyms, and we didn't really tell each other who we were until we did. And he came from a Jewish family in North London, I came from a Jewish family in Essex. And it was really lovely, a lovely friendship. We discovered the gay scene together, and he was older than me.
Mm-hmm.
He's still older than me, obviously. He's still around, still older than me. And I came out, and so did he, more or less the same time. And I moved to, at the time I was experimenting with gay clubs in South London, in Vauxhall,
mm-hmm.
Which was loads of fun. Heaven, GAY, lots of all the old clubs. We had a really good time, and I befriended one of the people that were going to the clubs frequently. We became very close friends, and I moved in with him into his house platonically as friends in my early 20s. I moved from Essex to South London at that point.
So what was life like in the city for you? Because on the outside it appears quite good. You're moving from Essex, you live in London, you've got a good job.
It was okay. I mean, my family work in property, and I went into property, and that isn't what I wanted to do. So you spend the whole of your life. I spent the subsequent 20 years of my life living from 17 to 37, living in an industry and living a life that I wasn't content in. And I'm not saying with myself, essentially, because I had loads of stuff that I hadn't really dealt with and looked at, and all of these bits and pieces that one needs to do in order to to get to where they need to get to. But at the time, it was a very difficult. It was hard work. But I had a good materialistically and externally, it looked great. I bought a flat in my early 20s, my early to mid 20s. Lovely car, nice holidays, earning good money. Senior, quite a senior role in different property companies in central London. I never wanted to. Putting on a suit every day was like wearing a costume. It really, it was just like, what am I doing? I'd gotten so far down that rabbit hole of, I have to do this really. This is what I was doing. It was tough, but I was successful at it, and that was always quite difficult. Like, you're earning good money, but you're not really happy. And I was always at that point, I finished my education at my GCSEs, and I just felt dumb. I wasn't able to finish my education, and that was something that really always bothered me.
So in London, putting on that costume, putting on that suit, it looked good, but how did you feel on the inside?
Awful. It's awful. I hated it. I remember crying on the way to work and not wanting to go to work, and I self-medicated. So as I mentioned, I started taking substances at the age of 15 years old. I went hard, like in my late teens, early 20s, mid 20s. I was really going for it. Like most weekends, probably into the weeks, lots of different substances to numb myself. I was addicted to changing the way that I feel for as long as I remember. And that was quite, even as a kid, everything had to be perfect. My mother was a stickler for perfectionism, and she instilled it in me from a young age, which was one of my worst bloody nightmares. Like, literally, it's okay not to be perfect. And even when I say it now, I'm like, yeah, it's all right. I don't have to be perfect. But it's taken me a long time to deal with that, because that stayed with me right the way through my late teens, my 20s into my 30s. It was a very, it's something that stays with you, these conditions of worth that are placed upon us by other people.
But you're still looking for external factors to fill the darkness inside, I would imagine.
Not now.
No, back then.
Oh, yeah, of course. But I didn't know what that was at the time. We don't know what that is until I had a head full of recovery, knowledge, experience, time out for myself. I constantly tried to fix on anything. Yeah, very true.
So what was the escalation of drug taking like for you? How quickly did that happen?
So the moment I moved to South London, and I was a party boy, I loved it. I mean, every weekend and it went from every weekend to, spilling out into the week. But for many years, it wasn't just a case. I was a functioning drug addict, as they call it, for want of a label, a functioning drug addict for a long time. And so were lots of my friends. It was an existence. It was hedonistic. Queer people generally, gay men specifically, really pushed a percentage of gay men pushed the boundaries a lot. And it was a very hedonistic, fabulously wonderful time of my life through my 20s and 30s that I just literally had a really great time until I didn't.
So the drug taking, was that only at weekends? Was that weekdays as well?
Towards the end, it was most of the time. But through my 20s and 30s, I was quite religiously sticking to the weekends. But the weekends may have started on a Thursday and finished on a Sunday. A couple of drinks on a Thursday, out on a Friday, out on a Saturday, relaxing on a Sunday, back to work on a Monday. So it wasn't, it was kind of loosely over throughout that time. And then as it got darker and the substances got a bit more, when the substances got deeper and darker as well, then so did my substance misuse. And also following in my mid 30s, I suffered some more trauma, compounded by the trauma I hadn't really worked on or gone through. It was just all a bit too much for me. So then I reached out to the only thing that I knew were more substances. And throughout my time working in property, I worked on the London gay scene as a promoter for quite some time. And I had a really great time doing that. Bought some really great parties, over to the UK from Spain, and supported by a well-known nightclub in South London that I don't need to name for the purpose of this podcast. But I was pretty everywhere when it came to promoting parties. So I had this kind of like dual existence of working in the city, but working in the nightlife industry, which is a perfect alibi to get wasted. And that's what I did until all of that stopped. And then I realised I couldn't stop the drug taking. Because,
At what point did you realise that? How did that show up?
Oh, well, they always say to any addict, if you don't think you're an addict, try and stop and tell me that you're not an addict. I was like, yeah, of course I don't need to take drugs at the weekend. The weekend comes, I was climbing the walls. Like, what do you mean? I don't like it. I don't know how to go out. I don't know how to socialise without taking a substance. Mm-hmm. Whether that could be ketamine, whether it was cocaine. It was minimal cocaine, but ketamine, or going to a bar with always, having a bag in my pocket of something. Socialising, going to a club. Couldn't have gone to a club sober. Ridiculous. And then it spills out into sexual life as well. Like, I couldn't have had sober sex. And that didn't happen for many years because it was just something I didn't ever choose to have or didn't think anything of it. But what happens with these substances, you kind of get pulled into a full sense of security and you think, oh, actually, I'm in control of this. Where in actual fact, you're not in control of it at all. And that's a very, very fine line. People often ask me, when did that switch occur? I genuinely can't tell you because I thought I was in control until I really wasn't.
That's what I was going to. That's what I was getting at. It's that very fine line, as you put it. That blur that you almost don't see happening. It just happens, but you don't even realize it because the slope is so slippery.
It happens all around you, and from experience, you tend to mix with people that use the same as you and take the same as you and push the boundaries as far as you do. That's what I did. So therefore, it wasn't anything different to what I was used to. But actually, when other drugs started to come into the mix, crystal meth was first introduced into the other plethora of party drugs. So I was taking party drugs, ecstasy, ketamine, MDMA, lots of the fluffy substances, as I call them, into my 20s and 30s. And actually, I started taking crystal into my late 20s, early 30s, but very recreationally. And it took a long time for it to creep up before it really hit me, really got me. But I was actually... I didn't intravenously take crystal until I was 36, 37. I only intravenously took crystal for a year,
right?
Roughly a year before I went into rehab, before I went into treatment. I was smoking crystal recreationally on and off for like 10 years before then. So it wasn't something, it was just something that was introduced into my, goodie bag with everything else. It wasn't something that was, so it was just and then G came along at the same time as crystal.
When you get introduced and you feel the need to take more and higher hits and harder drugs, I'm very aware of triggers here when asking these questions, but is there a sense that it gives you that bigger hit, that you get more of an escape by using more, by using harder?
That isn't my truth, but it is the truth of many.
My
truth is, yeah.
Why wasn't it yours?
Because I just liked being wasted. I just enjoyed being out of my head.
Why?
Because I didn't like my existence. I wasn't happy with myself. I wasn't content with myself. I wasn't, I say I suffered more trauma in my mid-30s. My mother passed away. My partner and I broke up after many years together. 5 years together. Made bad business decisions and things really spontaneously combusted again. And the only common denominator in all of this was me, actually. Okay, when I was a kid at 15 years old, maybe that wasn't my fault. People often ask you, what was your part in it? What part did you play? I'm like, well, I was a child here, actually. I didn't have much of a part to play. However, later on, I did have a part to play in it, and I wasn't living my true authentic self. So I did take more and more drugs, but just to be wasted, just to be away from reality.
You mentioned there about the sober sex as well. So this is playing into the chemsex. What is chemsex? Because it's not a term that's widely used in mainstream language.
It isn't widely used in mainstream language, which is one of my bugbears, to say the least. So chemsex, quite simply explained, are a mixture of different substances: crystal methamphetamine, GHB, GBL, commonly known as G, and or methadone, used in a sexual context in order to prolong the sexual experience, reduce inhibitions, and increase libido. Full stop. It's moved on slightly. It's now very much the common term is it's used chems. Those substances that I've mentioned are known as chems, and they are used predominantly by GBMSM people. That's gay, bi, and men who have sex with men.
Mm-hmm. So were you addicted to the sex as well as the drugs?
I wouldn't say so, no.
No.
That isn't my truth. Although I liked it, had great sex, and that's why people get pulled back into this scene so often. The sex is off the chart. It's like, the best sex you'll ever have. And you're completely hedonistically removed from reality. And that is also why it's such a dangerous kind of perfect storm for those people that are seeking intimacy the same way that I was at the time. Because these drugs took off in 2015. There was a height of it in 2015, and I've been in recovery 7 years this year. So I was at the height of this, and when I was working in the clubs in South London when all of this kicked off. So I was here when it all first started and saw it snowball the way that it did. But no, I wasn't addicted to the sex. I was addicted to. I enjoyed the sex that I had very much. That was fun. That was really good. But in my recovery, I'm able to experiment, in a much more safer setting within my own boundaries, with my own limitations. Whereas when using those substances, there are no limitations and there are no boundaries.
Did you feel like you needed them for sex?
At the time, in hindsight, I didn't have sober sex. So the answer to that question, by default, is going to be yes, because I didn't have sober sex for many years. It's all well and good sitting here going, no, I didn't need it. Of course I did at the time. Yes, I did. I needed them to get out of the house. So it wasn't just for sex. I would have taken them to go to Asda or Sainsbury's or Tesco's, or that's how I existed as a functioning addict.
So it's now having an impact on everyday life.
It was having an impact on everyday life before then. You could say that you're a functioning addict when you are taking drugs at the weekend and you're going out and you're partying hard and you think you are present at work on a Monday morning at 9 o'clock. You're not. I wasn't, but I thought I was. So a lot of acceptance around situations that I had no control over was, okay, I have to accept the fact that I wasn't my best all the time. I did let people down around me, employees, friends, colleagues, because I was probably on a come down or not myself. And then it had more of an impact on daily life when I wasn't working. I was put on gardening leave twice in different positions, different places. Of course, at the time it wasn't my fault, but in hindsight it was blatantly my fault. It was a mixture of my fault and there were other factors. And then you've got green card to take drugs all the time. I'm a gardening leave being paid, aren't I, to stay at home and get high. This is amazing. Perfect storm again.
And to get through the come downs, do you need more substances?
Yes, most people do, and that's how they get through them, or they just ride them out. I took drugs every day for probably about a year.
Wow. You couldn't see at that time that this was a problem. Was there anyone around you that could see this was a problem?
I knew it was a problem. I ignored it. I always knew it was a problem. There were friends that tried to reach out to me, but it was a very difficult situation that happened to me. I pulled myself deeper and darker into a very dark scene in South London that I had no control over. And it was a very difficult situation, so I'd removed myself away from my friends. I was removed from my friends by certain situations, and they did try to reach out to me, but I wasn't available. And when I say I wasn't available, it wasn't like I wasn't available for them to call me. My phones weren't working. I wasn't available, and that was manipulated by those people that I'd surrounded myself with.
So when you say that, when it comes back to the idea of it being a problem, when you realised it was a problem, did you try to stop at that time?
I couldn't.
But did you try?
I couldn't. I did try. I just couldn't.
Yeah. So it's such a fine line, isn't it, between no, I'm just having fun, to recognising it's a problem, then trying to stop it, but realising that you can't, and it's all quite blurry, isn't it?
But at that point, it had gone too far. I wasn't having a few lines with my friends at the weekend. It had gone too far. I'd taken drugs for too long, taken hard drugs for too long. ingrained myself in situations that were perilously dangerous for myself and those around me, removed myself away from social situations, my friends, my family, it had gone too far for me to even contemplate stopping, because the one constant thing in my life were substances.
So what was the point that you said, this has to change, this can't go on the way it is?
So I was involved in some very dangerous situations that could have cost me my life. And plausibly, my mental health was extremely fragile at the time. And I sought help from a mainstream service who didn't know what Chemsex was at the time. I had to educate my key workers through all of that process. And I was managed, and then they facilitated me getting to rehab in Bournemouth in 2017.
Was the acceptance there that you were an addict at that time, or were you still in denial?
I've never really... Saying you're an addict, it took a very long time for me to say that. Even in rehab, I wasn't able to, hey, I'm Ben, I'm an addict, you know, like you see in the films.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, this just doesn't really feel like me. I mean, I've pulled it apart, and recovery and the word addict for me is very subjective. I was addicted to changing the way that I felt for a very long time, and my addictions are linked to trauma, unresolved trauma. That isn't everyone's case. That is my case. So yes, I was an addict. I was addicted to changing the way that I felt, and I'd become psychologically dependent on some of the substances to make me feel better.
Mm-hmm. So you were trying to escape from feeling the way that you were trying to use external factors. When you were in rehab, those external factors that you used to cover up, i.e. work, the suit, the drugs, the sex, the everything else, is all stripped away from you.
Completely.
How did that feel?
Awful. But that's why I chose to go to a treatment centre. I was given an option of a treatment centre that I was able to go home at night with. And I remember at the time, even though I may have been slightly not really able to make great decisions for myself, I knew this was a good decision, because I was given an option of going to a treatment centre where I was going to be given my phone at the end of the day and told to go home and stay off-site in another house and come back again. You have to walk around in pairs or threes or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. And the other one was literally signing into a treatment centre for 3 months and not coming out, handing them over your phone, signing your will over to the treatment centre, giving them your passports, having a digital cleanse. And I chose the latter because I knew at that point I needed that. I was like, do you know what? I need to do this properly or not at all. Mm-hmm. There's no point me doing this half-mast, because I also knew leaving London, leaving everything that I knew, moving out of my flat, selling my first flat, moving out of my flat, coming down to treatment, I had nowhere else to go. Like, Bournemouth was the last stop for me, which it is for many people actually that find themselves in Bournemouth, coincidentally. And I knew I had to give it a best shot, so I was in rehab for 3 months, and that's when all my I'm laughing because I remember arriving. I remember arriving in treatment, and I had a taxi taking me from London to Bournemouth, which was extra to start with, because I thought if I'm going to get near a train, I'm not going to get near the rehab. I know I'm not. Mm-hmm. And I remember having my last hit in a roadside cafe on the way to rehab, and I kind of ordered a McDonald's, ate it in the back of the car, and passed out on the way to rehab. Woke up with my McDonald's down me. Got out of the car with my sunglasses on and just asked the treatment manager, "Is someone going to help me with my bags, please?" And that was how I arrived. And it was just, I laugh and I cringe because I was like, it was such a far cry from where I am now. But at the time, that was I was so disillusioned in it with everything that was going on. Mm-hmm. And as you're there and you're getting better and you're working through your stuff, you see more and more people arrive in those kind of states. You think, oh my gosh, it wasn't just me. I'm not alone.
Mm-hmm. How was it for you being there, being what you mentioned earlier in our conversation, that everything in your life had to be perfect?
Oh, you surrendered to that. Like, my life was far from perfect way before I came to treatment. So I'd kind of realised that I'd really fucked up, excuse my French. I'd really, it had gone to a point of no return. My paving over the cracks and striving for perfectionism had well and truly fallen by the wayside. So I'd kind of just surrendered to that fact. before I even got in the car to go to treatment.
So I guess it's the idea that everything is stripped away and then you try to rebuild.
Yeah. You look for in therapeutic jargon, it's like you're self-actualizing. You're literally going back to who you were always meant to be without all those other conditions around you that have caused you to use and mask your feelings and emotions and, change the way that you feel.
It sounds freeing, but it also sounds scary.
It's very scary. Rehab's scary time because you're left with your emotions and all the fears and things. So there was a lot to deal with. But after rehab, I was actually too poorly mentally to go out into the big wide world on my own. And it was identified that I was too unpoorly. So I stayed in a dry house, like a halfway house, a supported accommodation for another 7 months after rehab.
Wow.
So I'd come out of rehab in November 2017. It was cold and wet and miserable, and I got this room in a halfway supported accommodation. And I came out there 7 months later. I think it was roughly the summer of 2018. And it was a gorgeous summer. And I was living next to the beach. I was like, I'm going to stay here for a bit. Let's just see what Bournemouth can offer and how I can rebuild myself here. And it's just been the most amazing journey ever since 2018.
Why did you feel that you needed those extra 7 months?
Because I was petrified. I was petrified of myself, my existence, what happened to me, what I'd gone through. I was suffering CPTSD. I lost the back of my hair through stress-induced alopecia, through the situations I'd been in and what I'd suffered. I didn't have an existence in London. I didn't have anywhere to go, so I needed the support. And they identified the support. The treatment centre identified the fact I needed the support, and I was able to stay, given the safeguarding risks that I had mentioned previously. My funding was extended for the supported accommodation for 7 months after I came out.
What did you learn about yourself in those 10 months?
I think we're all learning. I continue to learn things about myself. I mean, it isn't just in those 10 months. It was just giving myself time to breathe and understanding who I really am as a person. Really, like what does Ben really want? What does Ben? Because Ben was never really allowed to do what he wanted to do ever since he was a child. What does Ben want? Where does he want to? What does he want to do with his life? Where does he want to go? What does he like? And without being answerable to anyone, family-wise, immediate friends-wise, I was on my own and I could find myself. And I hate that because it sounds like you're lost, like a £5 note in a pocket somewhere.
Weren't you lost?
I was very far removed from my true self. I could use the word lost, but it sounds like you're looking for something in your pocket, and I wasn't aligned with my true self, and now I feel like I am aligned with my true self and who I'm meant to be. So yeah.
Because the person walking in with the sunglasses, thinking they're going to Betty Ford and a celebrity by the sounds of it, and then walking out. And I need to be careful here because rehab isn't a magic pill. You don't walk in and walk out and everything's fixed. That's actually where the hard work begins. So I'm very careful with that. But how different was that person walking out?
All the ego had been stripped away, been smashed out of me, metaphorically, of course, by the treatment centre, the interventions I had, the therapy I'd had. Literally a different person. I was able to start over, and I'm very grateful for that. And ever since that point, I've grabbed every opportunity with both hands in order to understand this is where I want to go, this is who I really am, and never stay too far away from my spidey senses and my true sense of self.
How did you find your true sense of self?
It was a holistic approach. It was therapy, group work, giving back to others. I came and volunteered straight away for a national drug and alcohol charity in a local provision in Bournemouth, giving to other charities back in London, allowing myself time to breathe, going on spiritual retreats, meditation, yoga, exercise. I turned to veganism at the time because that's what I wanted to do. I gave myself a complete 360 of everything, like a complete rehaul of everything, the way I wanted to. But I was never had the chance. So sobriety at the time, I call it my recovery now, are two, were fundamentally the best things that ever happened to me. All that darkness was for a reason.
Mm-hmm. The aspect of vulnerability comes in there as well, because I'd imagine those 10 months allowed you to be vulnerable for probably the first time in your life. Is that something you still take with you today?
All the time. I'm vulnerably humble at every opportunity and grateful for everything that I've been through, that I've experienced, that I've nurtured, that I've worked towards, and the amazing professionals and people that have helped me along the way. So I've got to have a sense of vulnerability. I definitely don't know it all, and I'll never know it all. I'm always open to learn, to be teachable, and to be taught in ways that I never was previously. I thought I was, but I wasn't. I wasn't open enough. My vision, my peripheral vision I was very kind of narrow, blinkered in my vision. Now it's much more peripheral in a way. I'd say kind of like a 360 now. Again, 360, but like that's the way that I see things. But I always have to remain vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. How did you reach a place to be able to today do the work that you do, and to sit during an interview like this, and like I just said about the vulnerability, to be vulnerable, to talk about your drug use so openly and so honestly, and to talk about your mental health, because there's a lot of people who are still worried about the stigma, the judgment around that, even within the LGBTQ plus community of, if I talk about my mental health and I'm open about it, will I be able to adopt a child in the future? Will I be able to get a visa? Will that prevent me from doing that if I tell people about my previous drug use? All those worries go on in some people's minds. What would you say to them?
Everyone has their worries for a reason, but I couldn't possibly exist inauthentically. And this is my authentic, true life story that happened to me. This is my journey. And I just know that by me sharing my journey, and ever since that Attitude interview in 2021, there's been so much has happened since then. The amount of people that reached out to me and said the fact that you shared it has enabled me to share it, and you're shedding a light on things that we never even knew we were able to talk about. There's nowhere, just being that person, it was never my intention, but I realised there was a real space for that, for people to be wholly vulnerable. And I think when you are wholly vulnerable and you are truly yourself, you will be met by the people that you're meant to be met by. Everyone else is not essentially meant to be around unless you're truly authentically yourself. And people that are worrying about the way that they feel and the way that they are going to be perceived, of course, we're humans. I work in an industry, I'm a qualified counsellor. I'm just doing a humanistic counselling degree, just finishing that now, and I work in drug and alcohol services. Which is where my lived experience can be celebrated. So I've positioned myself to be in a place where my lived experiences, compounded by my academia, that I'm able to fix now as I'm getting older, which is a gift to myself, is wholly applauded. Whilst those that can't outwardly speak about their vulnerabilities, there are places to talk about it if you feel you need to, in confidence. Maybe seek those places out so you can find your tribe within that. So you can feel heard, you can feel listened to, you can feel supported in ways that I was. And that's why I'm as vocal as I am about my journey, the way that I am.
What when we talked about, you spent those 10 months reflecting, being present, but also looking forward to the future, to try to figure out what meaning there is to your life and what you can do to make an impact. Have you now found what your purpose is?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I feel I have, for sure. It's helping others. I don't think any of us are on this planet, in this existence, for any other purpose than to be of service and to support other people. People may listen to this and go, oh, here we go. But that's just the way that I feel and the way that I truly hold myself accountable every single day. Because I realised if I wasn't supported and helped the way that I was when I needed it the most, I wouldn't be where I am. And I've fallen into a new career. So I left property after 20 years. I started to train as a counsellor, so I'm just finishing this humanistic counselling degree, and I start a psychology master's in September at London University, which I'm super excited at. Box ticking that academic trajectory that I never thought I would ever have a chance to do. And I'm team leading in a London-based drug and alcohol consortium currently. And giving back for me is everything, really is everything. So I've aligned myself in a way that to be of service to as many people as I possibly can. And that's just keeps me safe, and it keeps me well, and it's my dharma, it's my calling.
And finally, Ben, when I was researching your story, and you've done quite a few articles and videos online already, and in one of them you said that you see your journey as a gift. Why is that?
It's a gift because, I can say it now, it didn't feel like a gift at the time, but it's a gift because I'm able to look back reflexively and understand how I am able to shape and mould others and other people's journeys the way that mine wasn't shaped. So I faced real difficulties accessing mainstream services when I needed it the most. Yes, there are amazing LGBTQ support services, but mainstream services really fell short. And I feel through my journey I'm able to really hopefully make the changes that I would like to make for anyone else that identifies the same way that I do, that is seeking support. So it is a gift because I'm able to learn from it, grow from it, and hopefully drive the change needed or support the continued change that is already happening with the amazing academics that are already working in this sector and field, to add my own value to that when the time's right, when I'm able to.
You're already doing that, and you're already making change, and thank you for the gift of your voice and your journey and sharing that today with me.
No problem. Thank you for asking me. I really appreciated the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.